Astrid was only 16 when they murdered her father and burned his trading ships. The rival merchants thought they had eliminated the competition forever. What they didn't know was that the helpless girl they spared would spend the next decade learning every form of warfare, deception, and strategy known to man. Some mistakes echo through generations. In the golden age of Viking trade, when silver flowed like rivers from Constantinople to Iceland, Eric the far traveler commanded respect across every northern port. His daughter Astrid grew up watching her father negotiate with Byzantine emperors and English kings alike. She learned numbers before she learned letters, understood profit margins before she understood poetry. Eric's trading empire stretched from the amber beaches of the Baltic to the spice markets of the East. His ships carried furs, silver, and slaves to distant lands, returning heavy with silk, gold, and exotic treasures that filled their warehouses in Hedeby. The name Far Traveler wasn't just a title, it was a promise that Eric's reach extended beyond any rival's imagination. But success breeds envy, and envy breeds dangerous alliances. Astrid's world was one of ledgers and languages, maps and mathematics. While other girls learned weaving, she learned the weight of different currencies. While they memorized poems, she memorized trade routes. Eric treated his daughter not as a future bride to be bartered, but as his successor in an empire built on intelligence rather than just strength. "Remember, little raven," Eric would tell her during their evening walks through the bustling docks. "A merchant's greatest weapon isn't a sword. It's knowing what others want before they know it themselves." Those words would prove prophetic in ways neither father nor daughter could imagine. Jarl Gunnar Iron Fist ruled the competing trading faction from his stronghold in Trondheim. Unlike Eric, who built wealth through cunning and connections, Gunnar preferred the old ways: intimidation, violence, and the simple logic of the axe. But even brute force has its limits when facing an empire built on intelligence and alliance. For years, Gunnar watched Eric's ships return with treasures, while his own struggled to secure profitable routes. The eastern routes that made Eric wealthy remained mysteriously closed to Gunnar's vessels. The Byzantine connections that filled Eric's coffers somehow never extended to his competitors. "It's not natural," Gunnar growled during a heated council meeting with his most trusted men. "One man shouldn't control half the northern trade. The gods favor bold warriors, not clever merchants counting coins in dark rooms." His lieutenant, Sven Bloodeagle, leaned forward with hungry eyes. "Then perhaps the gods need our help to restore proper order, my Jarl." The conspiracy took months to plan. They would need to eliminate not just Eric, but his entire network of alliances, his stored wealth, and most importantly, any heir who might rebuild what they planned to destroy. It had to look like a raid gone wrong, not a calculated murder of a respected merchant prince. But in their planning, they made a crucial oversight. They underestimated the intelligence of a 16-year-old girl who had spent her life learning to read people like profit margins. The attack came during the Feast of Freyr, when most of Eric's guards were celebrating with ale and less than perfect vigilance. Astrid was working late in her father's private study, reviewing trade agreements with Novgorod merchants, when she heard the war cries echoing across the harbor. Through the window, she saw flames dancing on the water, Eric's proud fleet burning like floating pyres. The ships that had carried their fortunes across known seas were being reduced to ash and sinking timber. But the ships were just the beginning. Armed men stormed through the trading complex, systematic in their destruction. These weren't wild raiders seeking quick plunder. They moved with purpose, destroying specific documents, targeting particular warehouses, eliminating precise individuals from Eric's organization. Astrid's training kicked in. Instead of screaming or fleeing blindly, she began memorizing faces, counting numbers, noting details. Her father had taught her that information was the most valuable currency, and she was about to become very rich in a very specific kind of knowledge. She watched from her hiding place behind the grain barrels as Jarl Gunnar himself strode into her father's main hall, axe gleaming with fresh blood. Eric the far traveler stood tall even with a sword at his throat, showing the dignity that had earned him respect from kings and emperors. He looked directly at Gunnar, his old business rival, with neither surprise nor fear. "So," Eric said calmly, as if discussing a trade deal, "it comes to this. I wondered when you'd choose the axe over the ledger." Gunnar's face twisted with years of accumulated jealousy. "You made it impossible for honest warriors to earn honest gold, old friend. Your clever schemes and foreign alliances made mockeries of men who prefer straightforward strength." "Strength?" Eric almost smiled. "You think murdering a merchant in his own hall demonstrates strength? You're about to discover the difference between strength and intelligence, Gunnar." "Dead men teach no lessons," Gunnar snarled, raising his axe. But Eric's eyes found the shadows where he somehow knew his daughter was hidden. His final words were barely a whisper, but Astrid heard them like thunder. "Remember what I taught you about patience, little raven. Some investments take years to mature." The axe fell. Eric the far traveler died as he had lived, calculating possibilities until his final breath. Gunnar's men searched the complex thoroughly, but 16-year-old Astrid had learned concealment from her father's dealings with dangerous men in foreign ports. She remained hidden until the raiders departed, leaving behind the smoking ruins of what had been the North's greatest trading empire. When she finally emerged, stepping carefully around her father's corpse, Astrid wasn't crying. The tears would come later, in private, during the long nights when grief threatened to consume her completely. But at that moment, standing in the ashes of everything she'd known, she was calculating. She had witnessed the murder of her father. She had memorized the faces of every man involved. She knew their names, their clans, their weaknesses, and most importantly, their underestimation of what a helpless merchant's daughter might be capable of achieving. More crucially, she knew something they didn't: the location of her father's hidden wealth, the secret allies who owed Eric favors, and the carefully guarded trade secrets that had built their empire. Gunnar had destroyed the visible structures of Eric's power, but the real foundations lay hidden where only family knew to look. Standing in her father's blood, Astrid made a vow that would reshape the political landscape of the North. She would not simply seek revenge. She would reclaim everything, expand it, and ensure that Gunnar's death would serve as a lesson for generations. Astrid disappeared from Hedeby that same night, taking only her father's most precious secrets and enough gold to begin her real education. But the education she sought wasn't available in any northern hall or trading post. She needed to learn from the most dangerous people in the known world. First, she traveled east to the courts of Kiev, where she learned the art of political manipulation from Byzantine diplomats who treated intrigue like a religious practice. She discovered how to forge alliances, break treaties, and destroy enemies using nothing more than carefully placed words and patient timing. From there, she moved south to Constantinople, where she studied with Arab mathematicians who taught her advanced accounting techniques that could hide vast sums of money across multiple countries and currencies, money that couldn't be traced, couldn't be stolen, and couldn't be understood by simple northern warriors who thought wealth meant chests of silver. But numbers weren't enough. In the training grounds of Norman mercenaries, she learned swordplay, strategy, and the arts of war. Not because she planned to face her enemies in single combat, but because understanding violence was essential to directing it effectively. Most importantly, she studied her enemies from afar, learning their habits, their businesses, their families, and their fears. She discovered that Gunnar's empire, built on intimidation and brute force, was far more fragile than her father's had been. After 7 years of exile and education, a new merchant appeared in the northern trading circles. She called herself Sigrid the Eastern Trader, claiming to represent Byzantine interests in establishing new northern routes. Her credentials were impeccable, her resources seemed unlimited, and her knowledge of international trade was remarkably sophisticated. Nobody connected this elegant multilingual businesswoman with the traumatized 16-year-old who had vanished from Hedeby years earlier. The transformation was too complete, the skills too advanced, the identity too carefully constructed. Sigrid began by establishing seemingly innocent trade relationships with smaller merchants who competed with Gunnar's empire. She offered better rates, more reliable shipments, and access to exotic Eastern markets that no northern trader had ever penetrated. Her success seemed natural, just another clever entrepreneur finding market opportunities. But beneath the surface, every transaction was calculated to weaken Gunnar's position. Every new alliance she forged reduced his influence. Every route she opened drew customers away from his services. Like a master chess player, she was positioning pieces for a game Gunnar didn't even realize was being played. Within 3 years, Gunnar's trading empire was hemorrhaging gold. His most reliable customers were defecting to competitors who offered mysterious advantages. His established routes were being undercut by new traders with impossible access to foreign markets. His own allies were beginning to question his effectiveness as a leader. What Gunnar couldn't understand was that he wasn't facing random market competition. He was being systematically dismantled by an enemy who understood his weaknesses better than he understood them himself. Sigrid had learned that Gunnar's lieutenant, Sven Blood Eagle, harbored secret ambitions to replace his Jarl. She fed that ambition with carefully timed opportunities and profitable side deals that made Sven wealthy enough to attract his own followers. She discovered that Gunnar's eldest son, Harald, resented his father's violent methods and dreamed of building something more sophisticated than a simple raiding operation. She provided Harald with examples of what intelligent trade could accomplish, turning the son against the father's philosophy. Most devastatingly, she learned that Gunnar's wife, Thyra, had never forgiven her husband for involving their family in merchant murder rather than honest warfare. Thyra began providing information about Gunnar's plans, thinking she was helping honorable traders avoid a brutal warrior's unpredictable violence. The confrontation came during the Great Yule Feast in Trondheim's main hall. Gunnar had finally connected enough dots to realize that his empire's destruction wasn't random misfortune. Someone was orchestrating his downfall with surgical precision, but he still didn't understand who or why. "Show yourself!" Gunnar roared, standing before his assembled men, many of whom had been secretly working against him for months. "Whatever clever coward has been destroying honest warriors from the shadows, face me like a true northerner." The hall's great doors opened, and Sigrid the Eastern Trader entered with the confidence of someone who owned everything she surveyed. But as she walked closer to the firelight, Gunnar's face went white with recognition and impossible memory. "No," he whispered, the word carrying 10 years of buried guilt. "You're dead. We left you dead." Astrid smiled, and for the first time in a decade, she used her real name. "You left me alive, Gunnar, and that was the most expensive mistake in Northern history." "My father taught me that every transaction must balance," Astrid said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "You took his life, his ships, his empire, his legacy. Tonight, we settle accounts." Gunnar reached for his axe, but froze when he realized that every man in his hall was looking at him with the cold eyes of betrayers. His lieutenant Sven, his son Harald, even his wife Thyra. They had all been turned, purchased, or convinced that Gunnar's time as leader was finished. "You cannot destroy me with gold and clever words, girl," Gunnar snarled, though his voice lacked conviction. "I am a warrior. I take what I want with strength." "Strength?" Astrid laughed, echoing her father's final words. "You think murdering an unarmed merchant demonstrated strength? Let me show you what 10 years of patient planning can accomplish." She gestured to the assembled men, Gunnar's own followers now serving her interests. "Your empire belongs to me now. Your allies work for me. Your family has chosen me over you. Your gold sits in my vaults. Even your reputation as a fearsome warrior has become a liability that everyone wants to escape." Gunnar's death wasn't quick or glorious. It wasn't the warrior's end he'd always imagined, dying sword in hand against worthy enemies. Instead, he faced the slow strangulation of political and economic isolation, watched his own people abandon him one by one, until he died alone and forgotten in a hall that no longer acknowledged his authority. Astrid didn't wield the blade herself. She'd learned that true power meant others performed violence on your behalf. She'd created conditions where Gunnar's death became inevitable, necessary, and even welcomed by those who had once followed him. But the most satisfying moment came when she stood over his corpse, holding the same axe that had killed her father, and realized that revenge was just the beginning. She'd built something far more valuable than simple vengeance. She'd constructed an empire that combined her father's intelligence with the strategic ruthlessness her enemies had forced her to develop. Standing in Gunnar's hall, now her hall, surrounded by men who had betrayed their former jarl to serve her vision, Astrid understood that she'd become something neither her father nor her enemies had anticipated. Not just a merchant, not just a warrior, but a force of nature that would reshape how power worked in the northern world. The 16-year-old girl who had hidden behind grain barrels was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had learned that the most devastating weapons weren't forged from iron, but from patience, intelligence, and the systematic application of consequences. Some debts take generations to collect, but they always come due in the end. If this tale of ultimate payback moved you, hit that like button and let us know in the comments which part shocked you the most. Subscribe to Time for Payback for more legendary stories where betrayal meets justice, and don't forget to ring that notification bell, because every betrayal has its reckoning, and every story holds the power to change everything. What revenge story should we tell next? Drop your suggestions below. Until next time, remember, karma never forgets. On fire.